Okay, class. First lesson in chapter 3 is about place values and estimation. One of the most important things that you can learn is place value because it tells you how much a digit is worth. All right, let's move that out of here. For example, this 3 in the hundreds place is worth more than the 5, obviously. 300. To the right of the decimal point, you have the tenths place, the hundredths place, the thousandths place, the 10,000ths place. And so you can round numbers when you're estimating, and you can round them to the nearest tenth, or the nearest hundredth, or the nearest thousandth by looking at the place just to the right of the place that you're going to round. Let's say that we're going to round this to the nearest hundred, or the nearest hundredth rather. If you look at the number behind the hundredths place, you look at the 2. The 2 is less than halfway to the next hundredth. It's closest to 4 hundredths. So if we were rounding this number, we would cut it off right here, and this would be 14 hundredths. Okay? The rest of these would just turn into zeros if we're rounding that. And any zeros that are at the end behind the decimal point is, they're not worth anything. They just hold that place. So, we're going to talk about estimation. Now, there's 2 goals, really important goals with estimation. First of all, you estimate so that you can do the math in your head. We want to be able to do the math in your head. Do the math quickly. And you want to estimate to get a close answer. So, when you're rounding, most of the time you're going to round to a whole number. Taking the decimal point, looking at the numbers behind it, and deciding, should I round up to the next whole number, or should I round to keep the whole number as it is? Let's look at this one, 172.98. Now, if we were going to take this number and subtract 128.301, this is 128 and 301 thousandths, because the 1 is in the thousandths place. You'd probably round this to 170 minus 130. 170 minus 130. 70 minus 30 you can do in your head. So if you can do 170 minus 130 in your head, then that meets both objectives. Be able to do it in your head and to get a close answer. That's going to give you a much better answer than if you rounded this up to 200 and this down to 100. Okay? So many times you keep the numbers that you can easily do in your head that are close to the numbers that you're given. Okay? Now, there's another method called clustering. Clustering is where you have a group of numbers that are close to a hundreds number, a tens number, and so you can round them all to the same number and then multiply. If we had numbers that were all close to 800, it would make sense to round them all to 800 and then multiply them by however many numbers you have. That method's called clustering. Another thing that you're asked to do is to round something to the nearest number. Okay? So let's look at 2 numbers, 3 and 14 hundredths and 3 and 15 hundredths. Now, if you're given a number like 3.14159, that's pi, and it's asking you to round that to the nearest hundredth, we'd have to look at the hundredths place and the place right behind it. 3.141 means it's going to be closer to 3.140 than it is 3.150. can also find numbers in between two numbers. What if you had 3.265 and 3.266? Well, you might think, boy, those numbers come right next to each other. But since we're on the right side of the decimal point, there's actually an infinite number of numbers behind every number, in between every number. Okay? By adding some zeros here, we can look at this number a little differently. You can look at this number as 3.26500, or a 500 at the end. And if you add two numbers between, add two zeros at the end of this one, 3.26600. Well, if you look at 600 and 500, there's tons of numbers between 600 and 500. There is 3.2651 and 3.2652 and 3.5653 and so on. There's 3.26512, 13, 14, and you can do the same thing for any numbers that are on the right side of the decimal point, that are less than 1. You can put zeros at the end and find numbers that go between them. What would go exactly between these two numbers? Well, 3.265, and if this was 50 or 50, between 50 and 60 is 55. So 3.2655 is between 3.265 and 3.266. You see how that works? That's what you're asked to do in this first lesson, estimating and rounding. You're just finding numbers between the numbers. You're understanding and using the place value system that we have, the base 10 system, so that you can estimate, do the math in your head, and still get a close answer. All right? So that is the lesson on place value and estimation.